Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am excited today for, I think, a different perspective and a different kind of conversation than we typically have here on the podcast. But I'm really looking forward to it. Today, I'm joined by Samantha Smits, who is an independent sustainable tourism consultant and the founder of Smits SusTour's Consultancy. And her expertise and I think her magical powers lie in empowering tour operators and travel agencies to really embrace sustainability in their offers and their operations. So, welcome to the podcast, Samantha.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here and I'm excited for a conversation.
Thank you. Like I said, I really love this conversation because I have found over the past 4 seasons that I've really been talking with women who are maybe further along in their careers or transitioned from corporate travel and then recently launched their own businesses after having been in the industry. However, this time we get to hear from someone who is really starting out. You're more new to this space. And I love that during our prep call for this that really helped to reconnect me to that part of my own journey. So I can't wait to jump in and hear more from you. I would love for you to just take a moment and introduce yourself and tell my listeners a little bit more about who you are.
Okay. Thank you. So, as you introduced me shortly, I am Samantha Smits. I am indeed still fairly new. I am 24. By the time this comes out, I'm already 25, as after Christmas it's my birthday. So, still young. And I graduated like in the beginning of this year. So, definitely fairly new to this. Just a few months after that, I started my entrepreneurial journey. And like this, I also ended up with the podcast. I'm very happy to talk about my work, where I, in my daily life, work with tour operators and with travel agencies and share my passion for sustainable travel with them. I think that's the shortcut.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the other thing that's really great is that while you're new into the industry, you're definitely not new to traveling, and that you really started traveling solo at the age of 16, which I think is not something that is very common, especially not in the US. But I would love to hear from you how you first kind of felt the pull to travel, what drew you to it, and what had you really excited about this industry?
The way my curiosity about travel started, I think it originated from the holidays with my parents and the combination of my primary school. The primary school I went to, for background information, I am from the Netherlands. And despite that the Netherlands is a Western European country, there are a lot of cultures there because we have had a history of a lot of migrant workers. So I also had kind of a multicultural class with many colors and cultures. So since I was growing up, I already got in touch with those. And in the beginning, you have no questions. And then when you grow older, you get like questions, you get invited to play at their homes. So we especially have a lot of people from Morocco, for example. So I would see the difference when I would play at a home of my Moroccan girlfriends than when they would be invited to my home. And this is where I started to realize that there are like differences in the way that people live and the stuff that people believe in. Because, for example, I could see the brothers praying or some, for example. And then to transfer to the part of my parents' holidays, we usually would go on holidays mainly in the Netherlands or to neighboring countries like Germany, Belgium, and France. And it was still good, definitely, if I reflect on it afterwards. But at some point, I wanted to know more. And they were perfectly fine where the way they were traveling, they were fine with that. They had no curiosity to go beyond that. But I started to get this big curiosity that I knew there's more to see in this world. There are more cultures to discover than Wiener Schnitzel and baguette. And I just wanted to see more. So I think indeed around the age of 16, I just started to discover slowly a bit more of Europe. But I think when I was 16, I definitely stayed close before. But then you grow in confidence. And I started my bachelor when I was 17, and I also traveled for my bachelor. So that also really helped traveling solo and young.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it is interesting when you start I think so many of us see hints of other cultures, and that's kind of that thing that opens the door that we realize, this bubble that maybe we're in growing up, that there's something else out there. And like you said, that curiosity just gets ignited. And then all of a sudden we're like, hey, what else don't I know about? What else haven't I seen? What other parts of the puzzle can I put together about, the world around me? And so I think that's a really relatable like emotion and drive. Well, I wanted to hear you mentioned that you recently graduated, and I think this is also for me really interesting because so many of us that were in the industry found ourselves, faced with the turmoil of what happened during the pandemic, and you yourself graduated in 2020. So not only, is it a hard industry sometimes to find your space in to um, especially for you carry your values forward into the work that you want to do. All of a sudden you're in this space that's very different than what you had been planning for when you started your career. I would love to hear what that was like for you, how you had to look at things differently. Maybe that was the catalyst of your entrepreneurial journey, but can you share a little bit about that experience?
Yes, yes, for sure. So I think I started my bachelor in 2016, and then I was like 17, very, very young. And I was lucky to finish the bachelor. It was a practical one, so it takes 4 years to have no delay to do it in 4 years straight. So then, indeed, in 2020, mid of the Corona crisis, 21 years old, I had a bachelor in international tourism management, which was, of course, not excellent timing. And it was also ended with I was writing a bachelor thesis. And for that one, I was in Thailand, actually, close to the border of Burma, and I had to return soon from my field work. I was planning to stay a little bit longer, but I had to return because on the news they were saying that the borders from outside of Europe would close. So my family and my surroundings and also myself urged me go home because maybe you cannot. So yeah, those times were crazy. And then writing the thesis in basically isolation. I think it's already kind of isolating without the Corona crisis, but add on the Corona crisis. So gladly I still managed, but then I think first I was just planning to indeed start working when I was graduated, and then with the Corona crisis, I kind of lost perspective. Like I had no clue what to do because I wanted to like travel, but at that point the borders were closed. I think we had like many hard lockdowns in the Netherlands. And of course, this also helped me to appreciate the beauty of my own country, but it also made me confused. But at the same time, I'm also grateful because it also made me realize 21, I am so young. I also realized I was not ready to work yet. I also still wanted to be young, and I noticed that I wanted to learn more because it was only at the end of my bachelor studies that I got in touch with sustainability, where I got this answer to my question. So tourism is not only about commercial, not only about sales, not only about marketing, there's more to it. It can be good because I started to doubt it at the end of my studies when all my peers would end up in sales and marketing. Some even went to IT. No clue how that happened. And I was just wondering, that's not where I want to go. But I know that I'm in the tourist sector that I like. And then navigating around, and with the help of the minor I did, I found a university in Wageningen, which actually offered a sustainable tourism master. So it kind of felt like the pieces came together because it also enabled me to do another internship abroad, which was like, yes, another excuse to live abroad for a few months, which really attracted me. And that also really helped me to choose this. And then after that, yeah, I think the first year was also still Corona crisis. So all the classes were again in Corona crisis, self-study. So I think this whole thing of doing everything for yourself during Corona, what I'm getting to, also made me realize that it's something I'm capable of. Because definitely when you're an entrepreneur, you're also doing a lot of stuff independent and for yourself without, of course, you can show up somewhere, but there's also a lot of work which you do on yourself. So there was a lot of reflection during this period, and I think all of that guided me to the point where I am now, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said about, finishing your first degree and kind of having this image of the industry and realizing that you weren't sure that was aligned with what you really wanted to do. And I had a similar experience. I did a 3-month training course in the tourism industry at one point, and when I got done, all I knew were all the things I didn't want to do. I was like, I'm not interested in sales, marketing. I don't want to be a travel agent. And there had been one man that came in and he talked about educational travel and conservation. And he had spent a lot of time in Africa and a lot of community-based tourism, even though none of that language was really being used when I, had this experience. And I just thought, whatever that is, that's what I want to be a part of. And luckily, shortly after that, I ended up working for a company that really had that kind of foundation around educational travel and conservation. And I thought, okay, yes, we can do this. And then I also went on to get my master's in sustainable tourism. And I thought, okay, great, we can do travel in a different way. And so I think one of the things I'd love to talk to you about is the beginning of our sustainability journey really has us realizing as we reflect on the mistakes we've made in the past and understanding, now how we can make different choices. I think a lot of people in their business and their own travels, one of the things that kind of stops them is they don't want to acknowledge that they've made bad choices in the past, or maybe they don't want to reconcile the behaviors that you need to have to actually be a more sustainable traveler. But I'm wondering if you could share some of the moments you had looking back, maybe choices you made that didn't align with your current awareness and values, and how you would support others in making that transition into that style of travel.
Yes, yeah, I can come up with various at this moment. Because indeed, like I think many people, when they start a sustainability career, they have had this moment when something just hits them, like a moment of realization, because there is no way, at least I don't think that people just know this automatically. You just have had to have some moment of reflection. And I think in my case, I really like animals. So as a child, I loved the zoos, and by now, then I prefer to see them where they actually belong in the wild. But like, so I think also in my early stage of travels, I would also have like activities with animal interaction because I was so uninformed, and I think that's a big trouble with travelers, and because they even tell you it's not bad. Like, see, the animal can walk away. There's no problem. Yeah, but the will is already broken. Like now I know, but back then, oh yeah, it will be alright. They are the experts. I had no clue that swimming with dolphins was bad, and uh, animal the snake around the neck, which happens in so many places. I had no clue those things were bad. By now I know, but those really are things you have to be educated or informed about. And in both those places, I did not receive any code of conduct, of course, because it was their business model. But like, it was not like the destination also helped me to avoid those, because usually destinations tell you what to avoid and what they recommend. And regarding the people element, I think you'll at some point realize that people are like working too hard in like crazy conditions, and they will be very, very nice about it. So in the comparable to the animals, you'll be like, oh, okay, they say it's fine, it will be fine. And then at some point you realize, no, it's not. They just are desperate for the money. And I also had very consumptional, I would call, behavior of traveling. When I think by now we call it revenge travel. I think a lot of people had like this tendency of revenge travel after the Corona crisis. I think I started revenge traveling because I didn't go much outside of the Benelux, which is like the term of the Netherlands and the countries around it, when I was younger, which is fine when I reflect on it by now. But when I was an angry teenager, who needed to see more of the world and who was curious as well, I started revenge traveling. I started taking many city trips and wanted to see the rest of Europe as soon as possible. And then by now I realize, oh, I could have done that differently. I could also just have like interrailed. But again, the point of information, I think at that point, it was not accessible in terms of money and in information. So yeah, I definitely would have done it differently if I know, but it is also needed to realize. So yeah, like I said, many examples.
Yeah. And I think, part of that, like you said, the where the education needs to come from, because as a traveler and you see these experiences that align with your current interests, you're like, oh yeah, I definitely want to do that. And they're telling me that this is a great experience and that it's good for the community and it's good for the animals and it's good for all these different things. So we think as travelers, we want to trust these people that look like local experts. But if tourism boards or larger agencies aren't helping to educate travelers about what is actually harmful in their communities, it's really hard to discern what is true and what is good. And can things be partly good and partly bad? Like all of a sudden, as a traveler, you're taking on quite a lot to learn how to understand what we need to do. And I think the other thing that's really important is, and we kind of talked about this before, is that what really needs to happen is a lot of hard and uncomfortable conversations. And I think we really typically try to avoid that. Most people don't want to be a part of those spaces. And so I just think it's really important to encourage people that are thinking about how they can change their travel behaviors, how companies can change their structures, that they just have to be a part of those conversations.
Yes, definitely agree. And especially like how you bring in the company side of it as well, because especially with sustainability and with a lot of things in life, basically, the issue will be pointed to the individual, or in this case, the customer, the traveler. Whilst I think, and that's also why I focus on tour operators and travel agencies, I think the companies have much more effect because a company will hit multiple individuals at once rather than take an individual one by one by one by one, which is also impossible because not everyone will budge. But when you're like a company, the chances are way more likely that you like convince the majority because you're like, you have the authority, you have the status, and indeed, the way you say uh, if you have a company who admits their previous mistakes, like I've seen this in my work that they would admit on the website that we used to offer elephant rides, but because of this and this, we have removed it from the offer. It is open and blankly like this on the website, and I respect it so much
Mhm.
because they are honest about their mistakes and it's education at the same time. Because you can also just remove and never talk about it anymore and just be like, okay, next. But I think it is way more educational for the people who are like resistant about it. We're going to email you, oh, we want to ride an elephant. Why don't you offer this?
Mhm.
It's way more educational if you, in an example like this one, explain the change. And then people will be way more like, oh, fair point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important. As you were even saying that, that's what I was thinking, is how powerful it would be as a traveler if are researching this area and you see that there, it's the thing you thought you wanted to do, and you click on it and it says, actually, we don't offer this anymore. Here's why. Then you've created such a great opportunity to share why you made that choice. And then the other thing that you said too about companies offering what is already more sustainable, because then travelers have no other choice. Like are booking sustainable travel because it's the only thing being offered to them. They don't have to choose between two different options. You're setting it up, within the company that way. And I think that that's happening more and more now. I do think people are really trying to create that offer. And I think especially for agents, and I should have looked up the name of this past interview, but I'll put it in the show notes for people listening. But agents really can communicate with so many travelers. And, they're offering such a wide variety of things that if they really start talking to their travelers about sustainability or putting forward different products that are aligned with that, they can really, I think, powerfully shift consumer behaviors with the way they're influencing travelers.
Absolutely, I fully agree.
Yeah.
And you also see it a lot even between the companies themselves. I think a lot of companies also look at other companies. Or for example, it's a question I get asked a lot with, for example, I'm also a coach for Travel Life. And then people ask me, what is the benefit of sustainability certification? I will not dive into that too much, that's too technical. But here the point is again, you see a lot that when people start with the certification, or in this case with sustainable behavior, it rarely happens out of own interest. I mean, if it is, I think it's the great motivator. I would love that to be the main motivator. But to be honest, it happens a lot because they see like a bigger company being successful and embracing it too. And then they're like, oh, we should look into this too. And then usually they start to get on the educational side. Or maybe this is just the context I'm in and other people are in way more greenly motivated context, but this is something I see a lot in practice.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back before we talk about a few of the other things on my list to your work in Thailand and the thesis that you wrote and your experience there. And I'm wondering how that experience influenced where you are now and what you saw really being immersed in that community, how that has shaped what you're doing moving forward.
So the whole reason I chose this like bachelor topic, I knew by then I already did the minor, which was like focused on sustainability in general, but that was not tailored to tourism yet. But then I knew usually in sustainability, what I will tell other people, you have like the people aspect and the planet aspect, and also the money aspect, of course. But like within sustainability, it already came back to me again that I have the greatest interest in the people part. Already started from the primary school, as I explained. Like I've always had this interest in people's ways of living and cultures, and just I am so curious. I ask my friends way too many questions, but it came back and there again. It keeps this continuous line. I wanted to do something with the people and tourism, with the people actually living somewhere. And I found this organization. It's an NGO, I believe. They're called Fair Tourism Foundation, and they work a lot with communities. And because of them, I actually figured out what community-based tourism is. And then I took like a deep dive. I wrote a bachelor thesis on it. And I believed in combination with it, that was a great excuse for me to travel. I did not want to write about some people far away, write in their name, write about them, research about them without having seen them and also just talked to them. For me, it felt kind of rude. Maybe I'm just using this as to excuse my travel behavior, that I did not hear their part of the story and that I would just write on their name based on old research. So I kind of already knew from the beginning. I mean, I financed it with my student loan, but I already was like, I'm gonna have to do this one. I really want to go there. I have to hear the perspective. I will arrange a translator or something. I don't believe this research will be good without hearing it from their side too. And in this case, it was about two villages. One village already had some kind of a CBT model, which still needed some improvement, but they had a model which could be used, but it was not used a lot, or at least the people living there actually recognized the model, but it was not communicated to the visitors. So then you already see this gap, which is again about informing. It is so important to inform the travelers. And then after visiting them and having a homestay, so getting their food, which basically is 5 times rice a day, but again, variation. It's very tasty as well. I went to a near neighboring village, and that was such a big contrast. That they were like in the media, it would be called like a human zoo. It was about the giraffe woman, and all of these terms are very derogatory. They are like bad terms because they have like tribe names. They are tribes, the Kayan tribe to be specific. And it was such a big difference where one felt more like authentic village to me. One was like a market, and then around it there would be living people with normal houses, and then kind of like a centerpiece, a square. In there was a market with those people. So it was such a big difference to see that, and that's then also when I realized to yeah some stuff would also be some kind of a show, because for example when there were no tourists they would be on their phones and other stuff like this. And again, I'm not telling them they shouldn't be, they're humans, I'm on my phone all the time too. But it really strikes me to see like the difference also from the back end, from a place which had a CBT model and a place where I was sent to look if there was any possibility for a CBT model. And wow, yeah, it was especially when you then talk to these women, because both places had the majority of women. You need a good translator, of course, and some stuff will still get lost in translation, but most of them just have good intentions and again don't have the knowledge. And then when some they would even learn some stuff from my interview questions, which I was surprised by. So yeah, it has been an eye-opening experience next to just like experiencing being like in an Asian culture, being in Thailand, close to the border of Burma, also hearing their stories, because this tribe are actually refugees from Burma. So they are a tribe who were like refugees from Myanmar, Burma, settling down in villages, becoming a tourist attraction. So it was crazy to learn about it and to how hospitable they were with hosting me and cooking for me, even teaching me how to do laundry by hand because I never did laundry by hand before. Yeah, it was a humbling but such a great experience, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Yeah. And I think, what you're explaining, just seeing the power dynamics in travel, and especially I think in community-based tourism, I think so many of us believe this is really important, that we need to have conversations driven by communities. But we have to also understand the power dynamics that already exist, especially as you were talking about with the refugee culture in another country, what is already in place systemically that is not fostering equitable travel or even the opportunity for equitable tourism. And I think that's one of the things for me when I traveled, is like noticing that inequity was the thing that made me think, okay, I think maybe we're not doing this right. That this feels, like you said, like one place felt very performative and one place felt very real. And how did that happen, basically side by side one another? Like, what were the differences that caused that to happen? So I imagine for you that was a really, like you said, a really powerful place to observe what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And just they're from the same tribe. They were just like one. There was like a small hike in between of maybe like not more than 2 hours. So on a small hiking distance from there, two different worlds, same tribe.
Mhm.
And they know each other. They will talk about the other villages, gossip even a bit about how stuff is going in the other village. Oh, it's crazy, but it was such an interesting experience. And then it really humbles you, because of course I think the big part about travel, when you don't make it as much consumptional and when you really start to see other cultures, it really humbles you and
Mhm.
it teaches you a lot. Exactly the way you were talking about inequality. I think s- I still get like confronted with inequality regularly, and then you just want to figuratively hit yourself in the face, like how could I ever think certain stuff or ever doubt about certain stuff, or how can I not be happy in the situation I am if they have the best, are living so happily in this one. For example, and I spent a lot of time in Tanzania, but I also have seen this in Thailand, that like people can be so happy with so little stuff. And it really made me back home. I had a very hard time throwing stuff away. And again, I would prefer to recycle on the sustainability part, but I would hoard. I couldn't even recycle. I would just hoard stuff. And oh, even trembling made me kind of trying to get rid of that habit, that I just was like, why do I need all this stuff? What is this good for? Some from memories, yeah, sure, but this one can just go to like the second-hand shop because I was so afraid of throwing it away. And then, oh, it really gives me every time I get a new lesson, I think like it will never stop teaching you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And yeah, to see how different cultures place different values on different things. And I think, like you said, we've been a part of a very consumptive culture, for many years, and that has flowed into travel. And I'm glad you brought this up again, because I think it's a way we've been taught to travel. I was just talking with someone else about this as well. Like, we as travelers, if you go back to, the education that happens to us, we've been taught how to consume experiences. And so we really have to think about, I think, as an industry, shifting that story that we tell travelers of what they want to get out of an experience, which, they now believe it's seeing all the top sites, seeing them as quickly as possible, seeing them with days that start at 6 in the morning and go until 10 at night to make sure that you see everything. But I think so many companies are now shifting that to, how do you want to feel when you travel? What kind of connections do you want to make? How do you want to support local communities? Which then we're really talking about very different types of experiences.
Yes, I think more meaningful experiences. At least this is the word I'm seeing more. Even my bachelor, I think I received the newsletter of them today. Actually, that they used to have like the tagline. I used to go to Breda, Boas, and they used to have the tagline "Discover Your World," which is great, but could be regarded a little bit consumptive indeed. And they changed it to creating meaningful experiences, which I really applaud them
Mhm.
because that is indeed like the change in focus towards what I always say. Like a good solution in sustainability would be for people to travel less, but I just know that's not gonna happen. People will have this desire, so then it's so important that if you do something, do it good. So then give them more meaningful experiences and educate them on how to be more meaningful to the community and the destination. Because I really believe in that like the majority of people will do good when it's easy for them and when they're educated about it. Because people just tend to go for the easiest choices, right? So just make it easy to do so.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And when you were talking about sustainability too, I think a lot of times we think it's, we shouldn't travel at all, like you said, because of all transportation is inherently at this point in our existence not sustainable. And so then, that would say that all travel is unsustainable. But when you were talking about the other pillars of travel, which I think both of us, the community part is so important, the people part is so important, then they do need travel for their sustainable lifestyle, for them to be able to exist in so many places around the world. But just trying to figure out how to change the model of how those interactions are happening. So I love, you know the way that you've talked about travel, which is something I want to get into next. This is how you and I met, is seeing each other's posts on LinkedIn and Instagram. I think we just were like, yes, I love what you said. Yes, I love what you said. And then eventually we found our way
Yes.
into messages. And I still love following your content. So I really encourage my listeners on LinkedIn to
Thank
make
you.
sure they find Samantha. I think that you do such a great job, one, with consistency, which is huge. I know that is not, although I shouldn't say it's not my thing, because one of my friends says my strong suit is consistency, but I schedule everything, so I forget I'm consistent. And two, that you create really valuable and clear content that is like very approachable, not technical. Even through this conversation, I noticed you are really conscious of that, and that is very honest. So I'm wondering, how did that come to be? Is that something that's innate to you? Was that a decision choice you made in content? And can we talk a little bit about how you're using those platforms as a place for connecting and education as well?
It's definitely a decision because in daily life I can get technical, but then call it Dutch culture, call it the way my friends or my support system is. I think I have a very honest, straightforward support system, and I welcome that definitely. So I will get called on it very soon when I'm too technical. And even in the beginning of sharing content, I think I also was too technical. And I also got feedback about it, and I saw the difference in engagement as well. And it was kind of funny because I wanted one of my unique points to be I'm already quite chatty of myself, but then also to be able to talk about sustainability in a chatty way, which doesn't make people like, oh, sustainability, but are more like, oh, okay, okay. I always wanted to do this, but it's definitely still like steps I have to take in. So it is a good, great compliment of you to hear that I'm or apparently already succeeding on that part, because I've definitely made decisions on that. I'm also like getting help with it sometimes to just ask just to get some feedback. I will, for example, like ask my boyfriend. For example, he's in tourism, but not on the sustainability part, and then he will explain to me if it's like too technical, or I have someone on, who helps me with like this designs, like all the content that's mine, but the designs I usually get help with. So then she has to put it in there anyway. And she's Dutch like me, and she's also very, very direct. So she will just say, "Girl, I have no clue what you're saying. What do you mean?" And I think this makes me very, very humble, and I really appreciate and welcome this always. And it really helps me to do so. But I think in general, I'm also when I'm talking, it's easier for me to be more casual because I'm kind of think this was also in my personal in my previous travel behavior. I'm oh how do you say so like I talk sooner than that I think. There's an English word for it, but it's in the top of my tongue. Maybe I can recall it later. So usually I've already said something and then my mind's like, hold on. And then when you have the time to actually write something, I will overthink it. So then when you overthink, you have more chance to make it too technical. Then when I say something and just think about it 10 minutes later, what did I do? And again, you should never be ashamed of yourself. You should always be authentically wherever you want to be. But that happens a lot in my case. But it is a benefit, I think, when talking about sustainability because it's way more. I really see that people appreciate this indeed. When you talk about them with that in a conversational way, you actually already break it down and make it seem more approachable, less scary. Because for some people, it's a very scary word because they're afraid it's like something expensive with too many technicalities.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then when you just talk about like, oh, but you can just do this and it doesn't cost you any money. You can do this tonight or tomorrow, and then the day after you can do something else. And then you've started with sustainability. And
Mhm.
they're like, huh?
Mhm.
And that such reactions are like the most. When you like crack into someone's mind with you can just start small. Because the smaller steps invite for bigger ones.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing too. Like not only does the conversation need to be accessible, but the action needs to be accessible. And I think especially if people are talking to sustainable tourism professionals, they think, well, I don't know anything about it. I don't know all the things you know. I can't do this. I'm not going to get my master's in sustainable travel management in order to shift my business. And so again, there's like this paralysis that kind of happens. And I think, like you said, this just just do this. You've already started. And then people are like, wait a second, what? I've already started. Or maybe even pointing out things in their business that they're already doing that are more sustainable than another choice is really empowering to see, like, oh, yes, I can actually do this. And I think probably you and I are both speaking about smaller businesses, maybe even with one or two owners or operators. Um, so then the idea of completely changing your structure feels nearly impossible. So I think it is really helpful to find those small steps and see how that they can make changes. The other thing that I loved that we talked about before is kind of the idea of you're on the right path when you're being met with resistance. And we talked about how in early in my career, like really nobody wanted to talk about sustainability. And this is, going back to like 1998 or 99, like quite some time ago. But nobody really wanted to talk about it, or very few people did. And I always kind of make the joke that we were set at like the back, at one little table in the back of the room at conferences, and being like, don't go to that table. And I think it was really frustrating to see that it's a very different space now, but I would notice the discomfort of people. So I guess what I'm talking about is like when you notice yourself getting negative feedback, or when you notice people getting uncomfortable and ruffled, that you're probably in the right tracks, because the like ruffled feathers lets you see where beliefs are really deeply ingrained in a culture and ingrained in an industry, and that's where we need to make the change. So I'd love to talk to you about that a little bit. Like, what do you do when you notice that you're ruffling feathers, or that you are getting some pushback? um how do you keep yourself moving forward?
That's such a good one. And of course, every time you're still like growing while doing that. Definitely like in the beginning, it's hard to not always take it to like too personal. And then some point you just realize it's just like you say, you see where the roots come from. So you see that it's more about them than about you. And indeed, if you then, what I always try to keep it conversational and then figure out where this fear comes from, because maybe you can take it away by indeed breaking something down or see where it comes from. Because indeed, like the difference with when there's like resistance, it comes from something because they have like a view, they made their mind up. It's just I cannot imagine it is without reason, because there has to be a reason to have the resistance. So then I just try to, it's kind of like a puzzle. Sometimes there's more energy to do so than another day. But usually I try to just dig into where it comes from, because also for me, it's a lesson. I also like to, it's not just because I want to bother them by like, oh, I still want to make you do this. Just tell me what's up with you. It's also just interesting to see their perspective and see if I can actually do something with it or help them with them. So it is something my friends will actually laugh about when they hear me, because I think in daily life I'm not known to be the most patient person. But then I think somehow in my career I bring up some my patience. Maybe that's where all the energy for my patience goes to. But maybe because when I'm really like interested in something and when I see the benefit of it, just as in this one, to find out the roots of where this ruffled feather is or where this resistance comes from. I think this derives from this big curiosity that I've had since I was young. At that point, it just becomes curiosity, just like something I want to figure out, something I want to dive into, something I want to learn about.
Yeah.
So
And I
yeah, I think
think,
the curiosity keeps me up.
yeah, I was just going to say too, if you're consulting with businesses and helping them to create sustainability plans and strategies, and you're noticing that resistant to things, it's really important to understand where that's coming from, because that is the shift that you have to make. So you do have to understand, okay, why do they feel this way about this thing, or what were they told maybe originally in their career, or in this company, or in this, in this way, like to figure out how to untie it. If they're really connected to that, you're having to figure out how to rewrite that belief. And so I think it is really important to notice that. And I think sometimes too, I notice people have the resistance to the thing they actually want to let go of the most, but they're like still fighting. They're like hanging on to that really tight because they're maybe about ready to let it go, if that makes sense. Like it might actually be something that they realize they want to be done with, but it's been a huge part of their personal identity or their brand identity, or the industry identity. But it's like that one last ditch effort to hang on. And so, like,
Yeah, it's like the comfort zone.
yeah, so they're just resisting because maybe they are realizing they need to release it, but it's been such an important part of that identity.
Yeah, they might be scared because indeed they might realize at that point. I think that also helps a lot with sustainability, because at this point, I think there are, at least in my sector, there are like almost no tourism companies who have not heard of sustainability. You have to be very of the world maybe like very community based, not have heard of it, but then community based ones practice it in daily practice already. So in essence, I don't think that they don't haven't heard of it before. It
Mhm.
is just if their association with it matches the meaning, and if they see any benefit in it. And so yeah, I think what I see a lot is that it is, oh, sustainability is the thing that gets me clients, right? That is what I see a lot. And in the long term, yeah, probably. But short term, you're gonna have to do a lot of other stuff.
Mhm.
But then I try to phrase that in a nicer way, of course.
Mhm.
And yeah, then indeed they're like scared of the road they have to take because it has been presented so technical, because it comes with many conferences and maybe with like sacrifices, definitely sacrifices, what I see like in my what I saw in my studies with my peers, but also like with my friends or family, that they know that taking all these city trips by plane, that flying from the Netherlands to London, that it's a bad thing. They know, but they're so used to it. And then, indeed, why would they change? As if they're gonna change the world by themselves. And then you will hear a lot of arguments like this. They're just rooted in this comfort zone that we were talking about, that you talked about. And it's hard for them to let go. And then when the other option gets easier, or when there's more known about it, because now it's just like, yeah, I know that the train is better, but oh, it's difficult, takes so long, and delay. But at the same time, the airplanes get delayed all the time as well. But then it's so rooted that don't touch the planes.
Mhm.
And it's with a lot of other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So fully agree with like the rooted and the comfort zone part.
Yeah. Well, before we end, I would love to talk to you a little bit about what you're doing right now and what you're most excited about with the clients that you're currently working with, and what you think you're, really looking forward to in the immediate future.
Um, so the clients I'm currently working with, I would say mostly tour operators, and I see it's a lot, at least at the beginning, are like early stage. So it's kind of interesting that me being early stage, I'm also finding other early stagers, or at least clients then, who are just who maybe trust me or believe I have some kind of authority, or maybe it's the content you're talking about which seems approachable. And it will always start with just asking me questions. And I have like this thing where people can first have like the 30-minute free consultancy, because it's beneficial for us both to get to know each other. And then from there, usually, I think what happens now a lot, that I just create like a strategy for them. Just explain the first steps they can take, because it's such a big, scary thing. And then I'll just try to break it down for them, like in your situation, this would be beneficial. Or what also happens a lot, I really support the concept of storytelling. I think I don't really do it in my content, but I find it very suitable for like tourism companies. It's also really something I would like to do more within the future. Just have to find the right people or the right project. That I'm like kind of advising tourism companies to sell their tours in a storytelling way. Because I think um, when you, for example, have a certain type of hike or something, for me, it's way more preferable to read it from on day one. We start here and we walk there, that you get like immersed in how this experience is going to be meaningful to you, then that you see the additional value and the uniqueness, rather than just seeing pictures, a short description with bullet points, because then it's very direct, very short. So I think that's always something I recommend. So yeah, to summarize, at the moment a lot of early stagers, and just helping them taking the first steps and taking this fear away. Because somehow I seem like a service desk. Maybe I get a lot of questions, and then I have to find the point where I'm too nice and have to start charging basically,
Mhm.
and where I'm still being nice or almost doing volunteer work, because maybe I'm sometimes too nice on that perspective, but hey, I'm also still learning. And I feel very honored that people trust in me for those kind of questions. And yeah, for next year, my future, maybe I also love the place where I'm now with like smaller companies and like early stagers. But I think it would also be really cool to make like maybe like a big impact with like a bigger company or something long term that I can like review more often. Like I said, like a storytelling project would really be something of art. And then maybe something of like a track or something with community would really speak to my heart. But I'm also still really open to exploring stuff, and I'm just very happy that I get to connect with many people on a daily basis. Like I connect with you and ended up on this podcast, and like connecting with people brings so many beautiful things. So that's also something I definitely wish to continue.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I do think that's the most important key to everything is the connections that we make and the stories that we can tell. I mean, that's I think very much what the podcast is all about. So I appreciate that. Well, before we end our conversation, I have a few rapid fire questions that we're gonna to jump into. So let me get to those with you. The first is, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading? I am a very bad reader. I have books with me, but usually I only read them when I have to be on the plane. I am still reading a book. I've been taking too long for it already. It's a Dutch one. I think it's called Waar is het avontuur? Where's the Adventure? It is a book written by my bachelor thesis supervisor who really inspired me and still does with her content and with how she advised me on this bachelor thesis with talent and stuff about choosing for adventure. And she also believes in micro adventure. So she's also like explaining you don't have to travel far for adventure. You can even find adventure in your own backyard. And it is part of the mindset I'm trying to work on daily, that I really am working on a positive mindset, a growth mindset, but also the adventurous mindset, which goes very well in part of my curiosity. So I wouldn't say currently reading because I'm such a bad reader at picking up a book. I should do it more often. I really want to. I tell myself every year I should read more often. But at this moment, it's usually when I'm somewhere without the internet, young, phone addicted, so very bad of myself. Then I will grab the book and I will continue. But it's also very nice to then like dive back into it and think about what I read before.
Yeah. And I love that idea. I think especially during 2020, 2021, I was talking a lot about the art of travel, which is similar to that. Like you can like find those experiences all around you, and even in your daily life you can bring that curiosity and that approach to just living. So I'll have to look and see if there happens to be a English translation of the book that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think there might be. At least her English, she speaks English very well for sure. I mean, she was a lecturer at the bachelor I went to.
Yeah.
I can try to look it up for you and send you a link. I definitely recommend it. I really like the way she's talking. And
Thank you.
otherwise, she's also a very inspirational woman for this podcast, potentially.
Thank you. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Mm, a notebook and food.
Yeah. I think
I'm a very hungry person, so I usually try to be prepared by having snacks with me. But I also really like to try out local snacks. I really like to try out local food. And that can go very good or very wrong, but that's the curiosity which takes over my part, of course. And a notebook, I try to, if I see something or like a thought occurs to me, don't again want to grab that phone. And especially when I'm like on my way to travel, I want to put the phone away. I don't want to be the phone zombie on the road like this one. My awareness is good enough to not do that one. So then I really like when you're like on the bus on the longer journey or somewhere else, and then you can just note something down, and sometimes you get carried away. And for like both my bachelor thesis and my master thesis, I had research methods which also involved noting stuff down and observing. So it's again something I should do more often, just like picking up the book. But then when I do it, I find some sense of peace.
mhm. Thank you. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short while. Where would you still love to sojourn?
Mm, oh, it's so difficult because I love to travel to a lot of places. But I think I have two answers to that one. I still want to explore more about like Middle Eastern culture or like maybe North Africa. For example, I still have like Morocco on the list, but I for a long time when it's like safe and there's no war anymore, I also would really love to go to Syria. So kind of like cultures that I've seen a lot in the Netherlands because we have many Syrian refugees and people from Morocco were like the migrant workers back in the day. They have children by now. That's how it went. And their cultures are so rich. I really believe that like the Arabic culture is so intensely rich. And again, the food interests me too.
Hmm.
And I would just love to see it from their perspective and just to see the colorful markets, all the colors, the architecture.
Hmm.
I also really love to see like architectures makes me realize that I'm not in place I'm used to. And the other answer would be totally different, like cold, very high, because I've been going to a lot of warm places, very south. But for example, it is a bucket list thing, so I shouldn't do it too consumptive. But I really want to see the Northern Lights. But then I think you can like combine it in a way when you go to or Lapland or Iceland that you can do it in a good way, stay for longer. Especially there's a lot of good stuff about Iceland that it's like one of the best countries for women and stuff. So a
Yeah.
lot of stuff still on my list.
Yeah, well, I know too. I think people that do some very mindful experiences that include the Northern Lights in those areas. So I'll be sure to pass those along. I think you'll love the next question from my understanding of you now. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
Oh wow wow wow. Phew. I'm thinking of the correct example because I eat a lot of different stuff. But I think, and this is not exactly the same because I think you can't really replicate. There's a lot of stuff when you eat it somewhere you cannot replicate at home,
Mhm.
or you can try it, but it will not be as good. And for example, in Tanzania, there's this thing. It actually derives from the Indian kitchen. I think it's called chapati, but there is somehow there are also a lot of Indian people in Tanzania, and it is some kind of flat bread, but it looks like a pancake. Please don't be offended, Tanzanians and Indians. So then whenever you have like a different kind of flatbread in a different country and it doesn't have the same structure, which happens with doughs a lot, then you still think about it, but then you think, oh, the ones there are better or
Mm.
this is better. And yeah, I think we we in general also with spices because at home people think I eat very spicy. Like at my parents' dinner table, the spices, even the black pepper. It's a very Dutch, bland, non-spice household. Even the black pepper, it will be next to my plate because she, the girl who wants to season her food differently. So then, whenever I go somewhere where they spice the food, it's already like, mm. So it was great to just eat with like international students who know how to season their food, and then it already gives me warm feelings of travels. Just
Yeah.
traveling inside your own country to spices on the plate.
Yeah, my daughter, that's one of the things. She's like, I love the complexity of flavors, like when we were in Mexico or in different places, just that different the flavor profile that is much more complex than we're used to. The
Oh,
next question, who is a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
oof. Who's the person who inspired me to explore the world? I was so young, so I'm thinking. I think social media must have played a role, and again, the people around me maybe. Um, the, I know. I had to think a bit. I think it's my grandma. It's my grandma. She sadly died almost 5 years ago, but she was the only one in my family, both sides, who traveled like me. And she even did it when she still was old. I loved it so much that when she was like in her, she died too young, but again, she was 70, so not to complain about. In her 70s, she would still travel with her girlfriends. She would leave the husband at home, take the girlfriends and go to Thailand. And for example, for my bachelor, I had an internship in Malta for 5 months, and she would be the only one who knew where I was. And then in a lot of places I've been, I would be like, oh, my grandma's been here. And just at this point, I just wished I could have traveled with her. Of course, not
Yeah.
possible anymore, but like, it was a hard one to think about, but thinking about it now, it all derives back to my grandma, I think. And she
Yeah.
used to be my baby. We didn't have a nanny, it was her. She was the nanny. So I guess when I grew up, I just saw her doing that, and I was so inspired by it because I wanted to do the same.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the next question you may have just answered as well, but if you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Yeah, grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's directly the answer. Like, I would have loved to cook with her. I would love to travel with her, but yeah, all sadly not possible. But yeah, other than that, I think would love to travel with like any friend or like family. I think like I lived for 5 months in Malta, and then when like 2 years after I took my mom there to show where I lived and stuff, I think it all derives back to meaningful experiences. Like when you have meaningful company and the travel doesn't become so consumptive, but it's more about sharing experiences. I think just like anyone within my support system would also be a great match.
Yeah. The last